What's happening, everybody, and how the hell might y'all be doing out there? Thanks for tuning in to the Crash Bang Boom Drumming Podcast. Today's guest is Pokey Mo of the one and only Agnostic Front, and I've got a special host in my buddy Chris Enriquez, who plays an incredible local band, Spotlights, and who also did a previous interview, if you haven't heard it, with Kelly Scott of Failure, so check it out if you haven't already. But as for Pokey, my first exposure to him as a drummer was via New York hardcore thrash band Leeway's record Desperate Measures back in good old 1991. And I was just obsessed with that record when it came out, man. I couldn't play that cassette enough on my old Walkman, because those were the times in which I was living, and we all lived, assuming you lived then. But as a year I like to talk a lot about on this podcast, Leeway was one of those outlier bands that was melding different influences, making some killer music alongside other bands like Fishbone's Reality, My Surroundings, Primus Sail in the Seas of Cheese, Prongs Prove You Wrong, the first Mr. Bungle record, Mordred's In This Life, Wrathchild America's 3D. And of course, in the same year, you still had heavier records like Sepultura's Arise, Death's Human, Overkill's Horoscope, Metal Church's The Human Factor, Corrosion of Conformity's Blind, and Metallica's Black Album. And on another note, another New York band that I personally thought shared some of that New York hardcore and hip-hop mashup akin to Leeway was 24/7 Spies, who released their This Is EP, and whose drummer, Joe Maitoza, in my opinion, shared some of the same heavy hip-hop swinging style that Pokey also had on that awesome Leeway record. And all in 91, too. Not to mention albums by Fugazi, Jesus Lizard, Melvins, Jawbox, My Bloody Valentine, and all the breakthrough grunge records, maybe with the exception of Alice in Chains that particular year. I can just go on infinity about the magical year that was 1991. Anyways, for the last decade, Pokey's been playing with the one and only Agnostic Front, whose new record, Get Loud, is out everywhere, so get your hands on it. And it was super cool to have Chris catch up with Pokey while Agnostic Front was playing a 5-borough tour here in New York with the one and only Sick of It All, who I was also a massive fan of growing up. And then I know Chris went on to go see Agnostic Front open up for the Misfits playing a stadium show, which is just completely surreal. And I'm sorry I missed that one, but I know it was killer. Crash Bang Boom Podcast can be found on iTunes Podcast, my SoundCloud and YouTube pages, Stitcher, Luminary, Google Play, Podbean, and more. If you like what you hear, feel free to check out any of the previous nearly 170 episodes and give me a like, a subscription, a positive rating, a glowing review, and or all the above. Whole lot of talks with drummers, so feel free to check them out. The support is appreciated. Also, shout out to my sponsor, New Orleans Record Press. If you're looking to put out vinyl for your project, going over to NewOrleansRecordPress.com to check out the many coloring, packaging, mastering options. You can add it all up in the real-time quote generator. Need assistance with designer packaging? They can help you, and they print both 12 and 7-inch records in both 150 and 180 gram variants, and they print small runs of 100 and larger runs up into the thousands. And that's the one and only NewOrleansRecordPress.com. So here we go. Pokey Mo, Agnostic Front, Leeway back in the day, many more. They get to talk about it. Thanks, Chris Enriquez. Crash, bang, boom.
Crowds go mad with joy. Give the drummer some.
What's up, everybody? You're listening to Crash Bang Boom Podcast. I'm in the Lower East Side at Barry Electric for a very special night. Agnostic Front and Sick of It All New York hardcore legends are doing a tour of all the boroughs. And being that I'm from New York and a drummer, I'm really excited right now because I have Pokey, who not only is in Agnostic Front, but has played in bands like Leeway, Both Worlds. I probably am missing a few other ones, but I will let you do the talking. So,
hi,
Pokey.
how you doing, folks?
All right, well,
This
thanks.
is Pokey.
Yeah, Pokey, thanks for joining us. Let's start with just a brief intro. Who are you? Where are you from? And what bands have you played? And I might have missed a few.
Pokey Mo. I'm from Queens, New York. Born in Manhattan, but we moved to Queens. I was in Leeway, Both Worlds. Currently, I'm in Agnostic Front. I played a couple of years in Murphy's Law.
I did not know that.
So
who wasn't in Murphy's Law?
Yeah, everybody was in Murphy's Law. I did a record for Marauder. I did their second record, Five Deadly Venoms.
You know, it's funny to mention that because I always thought you were from Queens because Leeway was a Queens hardcore band, of course. And
I grew up, for the most part, I grew up in Queens. My family moved to Queens when I was about 7. I found myself musically and stuff in Queens.
What are your earliest memories of getting into music?
I guess I grew up in a fairly big family. There's 5 kids, and I was the youngest one, and my older siblings, they grew up on like 60s music, like Beatles and Rolling Stones and stuff like that. And so there was a lot of like record playing, and sometimes you would take out a microphone and do like almost karaoke over the music. So it was, that's my first exposure to music was, listening to Beatles and Stones and stuff like that from my older siblings.
Probably very typical too for someone, of
my
age. If you're, well, yeah, I wasn't insinuating, but there's always generations of people that your exposure would typically be Beatles, or if you were a little, from the '90s, Nirvana, that kind of thing. But in that time too, I guess you were around when punk rock first started.
Oh yeah, I guess so. I was lucky enough to be alive when they used to. Actually, in the late 70s, there was a radio station in New York that played like some underground and punk rock stuff, but it was very short lived. I think it ended at around 79 too.
That's very early. I mean, I can remember. I'm 39, so I can remember as far back as Crucial Chaos.
But
that
was way before this.
Totally, because that's even before hardcore, right?
Yeah.
What are your earliest memories of getting into punk rock or hardcore?
My older brother got like a Road to Ruin album by the Ramones.
Queens.
Yeah. So. So that was my first, I guess, real exposure to punk rock per se. Was, I guess, 1976 or 77.
Pretty early on. I mean, because it's at that time, I guess, when it's just starting out, the whole genre of the movement. And then at that point, are you playing drums already, or is that still pretty...
That was right around when I just started, yeah.
Okay. So it's kind of before... how old were you when you first started playing?
Around 14. Yeah.
Okay. Were you playing in bands already, like in high school or with your friends?
No, just jamming to records. We put on a record, whatever was popular at the time. For me, it was the Cars. I love New Wave.
Yeah. The Cars had such a profound influence on a lot of punk rock bands, which I think gets overlooked because people know them from their hit songs. So as you're getting into music, you said you grew up on like Beatles, that kind of stuff, like what was on the radio. At what point are you like, I want to play drums? Like, how did that even enter your life?
That entered my life. I guess my older brother, he's passed away now. He started playing drums, and he started jamming with friends and stuff like that. And when he wasn't home, I would sneak in and play the drums, and when he wasn't home. And then one day he caught me doing it, and he was like, "Oh, you sound pretty good. You should do it." I would watch drummers play, and then just kind of try to do what they were doing.
It's so funny to. I mean, I've talked to a few people that have that in common. As a drummer, I can relate to that. It was just a strange thing. Like, I guess, like you're saying, like it makes sense visually. I don't know if that applies to other instruments where you can just watch a guy playing piano or guitar shredding, for example, and just pick up on it.
Yeah.
But I guess drumming, there's something very primal about it. You see a guy hitting hi-hats and a snare drum at a certain time, and to some people that are not schooled, I guess that's how you learn. It just comes to you eventually. What were some of your favorite drummers at that time?
When I was very first learning, just playing to records, like I said, I was playing to Cars records, Blondie records, and Ramones, and the Pretenders. I think those were my big 4, because for some reason, maybe because Road to Ruin album and the popular Blondie albums at the time, they had a really good production. And the drums were really easy to pick up by ear, and maybe seeing music videos and watching them play. Right. It helped me pick it up. And for some reason, I liked the way Marky Ramone played, and I liked the way Clem Burke played, or the way they looked when they played.
Right.
They were just like, they looked so cool to me, and I guess that's why I kind of, that I gravitated to me. Yeah.
It's funny too, because for one thing, what's interesting about that to me, aside from, I think you said the Pretenders, is that you named all New York bands and sort of in that proto-punk area. So you've kind of, it sounds like from the day you started until now, really stayed in that lane.
Yeah, that kind of punk rock inspired lane of music, and slightly pop, but punk rock.
Those guys,
Certainly.
as you said, were interesting to listen to and pick up on. I think also just as a guy that grew up on similar music, the pulse of bands like Ramones and Blondie, when you listen to that, it makes sense. It's not Neil Peart. It's not like Boston or Kansas.
It's not that complicated.
Yeah, it was almost like because there were dance songs
yes,
too.
there's a lot of subtleties that are cool.
Yeah, the simplicity of stuff like that in punk rock, I think, is always something. For me, I learned a lot listening to like Nirvana, for example. It just and then I went
Dave
backwards.
Grohl has that sensibility.
It makes you feel like you could do it.
Yeah.
That's cool. I mean, later on in your style, I mean, I'm jumping around here, because one of my next questions was, if you were schooled or self-taught, and I think you answered that already.
Yeah,
but
pretty much self-taught.
You also, later on when you were playing more professionally with Leeway, and of course, leading up to now, there's a bit of a metal thing going on too in your style and a swing. I've always assumed it probably came from a little bit of hip hop, a little bit of metal, but in your own sort of words coming from you, I'd love to sort of know when that kind of integrated into your style of playing.
End of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, like I guess like new wave kind of died off at that time. And then I started going to junior high school, and some of the kids that were in junior high school, they you would see kids with denim jackets with metal bands on the back of them, and then that spurred my curiosity, because it looked kind of like they were dirty and underground and kind of like kind of off to the side of of normal.
Right,
so.
like, and that's an interesting point too, because I think when you're in a hardcore scene or punk or metal, which we can call, I guess, or hip hop, it's like street music, or outlaw, or like rebel music, right? You just naturally had a gravitation towards stuff that looked a little more dangerous and sort of.
It wasn't pop, it wasn't on the radio. Yeah, certainly, it wasn't what everybody else was listening to.
Do you feel like music for you was a rebellion from the moment? Like, for example, like some people might get into music because they just love the technicality of of playing, and they end up playing like prog rock or something like that, but when you end up getting into heavier stuff.
Yeah, in junior high school, I started listening to stuff that my parents didn't like, and my older siblings was, oh, that's garbage. What is that noise?
Were they supportive of you and your brother at any point when they realized, all right, they're just really into this stuff and this is what they're gonna do?
Yeah, I guess at first they thought it was just gonna be like a phase. Always teenager, get into music and that's what you like. So then they supported. And when I started really taking it seriously, then they realized, oh, he's serious about it, and then they supported me throughout my entire career.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, it obviously paid off. I look at you guys and Sick of It All, who you're playing with tonight, and there's only a handful of bands from New York, but also just in the hardcore
They're
scene.
from Queens too.
yes, and Alleyway Crew. I also think just in the hardcore scene, it's so niche that, like, you have Hatebreed, you have AF, you have Madball. There's not a lot of bands that lasted this long that made a living to this day, where it's still being carried out through time. When you started playing in bands, at what point did it go from a hobby to, I mean, I don't know if it was a goal when you started playing in Leeway for it to be a professional thing, but at what point did it go from something more than a hobby?
One summer I got a job at Important Relativity Records.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was a independent record distributor. They distributed like every punk rock, every hardcore label. So and I worked in the warehouse just picking orders. And so I had access to just a complete library of every punk rock band, every hardcore band that ever existed, because they distributed everybody to, you know, they distributed to all the cool mom and pop record stores, Bleecker Bob's, Generation, and even all the way up to like the major record stores. They supplied Tower Records as well. From working there, I started meeting people that I knew were going to be contacts in the industry. So that's when I started taking music seriously. So every band that I started to play in after that was doing gigs and you know, trying to do this, or had a record out at the time. Or
Leeway
actually was not my first band. I was for a brief time I was in a band called Raging Slab.
I think I've heard that name. I mean, just because I am such a I'm so into like this
Lower
like
East Side
historian, Lower East Side stuff. You know?
They were a Lower East Side band that sounded kind of country,
okay,
kind of southern rock.
Right.
The singer Greg, I forget his last name, but I think him and his wife they came from somewhere in Pennsylvania or something. And you know, they moved to the Lower East Side and were pretty like established as one of the Lower East Side bands. And
at what point? What time period is this?
This was like I think 86, 87.
Okay, so this is CB's is already a thing.
Yeah, CB's is already a thing. I'm already going to Sunday matinees and somehow I hooked up with this Lower East Side country punk rock band.
And
like,
this was
they totally defy like kind of, you know, like categorization. They looked southern rock, but like they had like the music had some elements of punk rock.
Right, I mean that's
like they definitely
right
sounded Lower East Side.
Yeah, the Lower East
in the
Side,
vein of like Circus of Power or
Degeneration,
like any of those like Lower East Side kind of punkish bands. Like
that's an interesting thing because the Lower East Side also was known for other different types of styles. I mean, you had Unsane, you had Lunatics. It was everything was going on.
White Zombie came from the Lower East Side.
People forget that sometimes. You know,
Lower East Side was very diverse in the late '80s.
Was the band that I think a lot of people saw you in when they first recognized you as a drummer, and that was kind of in the late '80s as well. When you joined Leeway, was there ever a goal or thought in mind where that was something you wanted to pursue professionally?
Yeah, I guess by then I was pretty serious with you know, drumming as a profession.
Yeah.
So when I joined Leeway was a very, very promising band, young and hungry and up and coming. The band was managed by a man named Chris Williamson, who promoted shows in New York. He did all the Rock Hotel shows. Yep, I've read about him in a lot of those old books, and like so he had a lot of pull in the industry. So I mean, musically, you guys also had a lot going on. It wasn't just straight up hardcore. There was some metal, and then later on, some elements of hip hop. Eddie, the singer, was heavily into hip hop. AJ as well. Great voice he had. And you guys also later on had some airplay on MTV. Almost, it was starting towards the end, getting into like an alternative rock thing. Yeah, sure. You know? Yeah, certainly. What would you say your influences at that time as a drummer were? I mean, you just mentioned hip hop, and we both were talking about, I guess, how diverse the band was. But there was a little hip hop, there was a little rock, there was a little metal. You know, what were you kind of drawing influences from? Well, by then it would be like the early '90s, and early '90s was such a great time in music because like it seemed like anything goes. Right. Like you could do anything as long as it was good. People would
It's true.
Yeah, people would hook onto it. So that led to kind of more experimentation certainly in the band Leeway, and I saw that kind of attitude with a lot of bands.
Yeah.
A lot of bands at the time started changing their sound and
Bad Brains.
Yeah.
I mean, I brought them up so many times just I guess because they're such a huge influence on everybody, not just in New York, but that was a time when even they were starting to with quickness, and I really thought Leeway and the era that I'm referring to with the Brains, that you guys kind of had a similar thing going on because people were kind of experimenting with different stuff.
They were going into more more of a hip hop feel, more of a soul feel, more pop, definitely.
Right. Now, how long were you in Leeway before that sort of? I don't want to use the word imploded, but you know what I mean. I guess there was a shelf life there where you guys eventually broke up, and I think you were sort of playing in different bands like Both Worlds and different things over the years.
I guess the band kind of unofficially first kind of split up around 2001 or so. We had done as much touring as we could have done, with all the records we put out, and the last one we put out was Open Mouth Kiss, and
it's a great record.
And I guess by the end of the touring of that record, we didn't really see much, else to do, but to do other projects.
Well, yeah, because at that point you had emerged in Both Worlds, which I think was on Another Planet. It was the same label that, if I'm not mistaken, was it on the same label that Leeway was on?
No, it was on a different label. It was eventually Roadrunner. It was on Roadrunner. Yeah, it was on Roadrunner. But when the record came out, they went through a big werestructuring.
Right.
And they got rid of all the hardcore bands.
Oh man.
We weren't the only ones. I forget who else was on Roadrunner.
Well, I know Madball.
Life of Agony, Madball.
Life of Agony and Madball were part of it.
Everybody was
VOD might have even been on it. Well, they were on some subsidiary Shelter.
So Roadrunner from then on was concentrating on Slipknot and Nickelback.
Oh, right. I actually know a lot of those folks at Roadrunner, and it seems like they're going full circle and bringing back hardcore again now.
Yeah.
That's weird. Hardcore is a weird genre when it comes to sort of marketed like it's this underground style and then making it commercial and then but thankfully I think now, just to fast forward, we're in a good time for hardcore where heavy music has, for better or for worse, come back into fashion. I've noticed that as a New Yorker, you see more people walking around in Black Flag shirts and Misfits shirts, and do they really know what it is? But
hardcore has become a fine wine now.
yeah, for better or for worse. But to get back to your
matured.
To get back to your career as a drummer, I'm going to switch a little bit to some of the dorkier stuff for anyone listening that is we're predominantly speaking to drummers that are listening to this. But what kind of equipment are you using right now?
Right now I have a Tama's Star Classic.
Oh, that's a great kit. Yeah, is that a maple or a?
I think it's either maple or birch. I'm not sure. Yeah. The inside looks like it's maple, but it was an old kit. I rescued it from a rehearsal studio. It was completely scratched up and tarnished, and hardware was kind of rusted, and so I just took all the hardware off. Sanded it all down and painted it flat black and put new hardware on it, and
that's a big effort.
And now Tama feature a kit. It's a Star Classic maple with flat black finish. Oh, so it costs around $2,500. So
is that a coincidence, or did somebody there find out?
I have no idea.
Yeah. Do you actually work with them directly as a person?
No, I have no involvement. I have no endorsements whatsoever.
That is a criminal thing,
I've tried to stay independent, my entire career.
Yeah. Well, I if anyone out there is listening in the drum world, that is, to me, this guy is doing a lot of stuff over the years, and especially right now with Agnostic Front, and so that blows my mind. But also staying independent is great too, if that's a choice. I know you have been active for a long time. So some people just know what they want, and
I know what I like to play, and I just use that, and that's it.
yeah. What are some of your challenges? Do you feel as like a professional drummer? Some people just they do the shot of whiskey and go on stage kind of thing.
Wow.
But,
I couldn't do that. Well, part of my ritual before going on stage is like I have to have like a good like 15 minutes of just silence and just sit still and do nothing and not think of anything and just kind of relax, because it's once the show starts it's pretty chaotic.
Right. That a lot of times that adrenaline rush can really fuck with your. You could cramp up. I've had that situation,
exactly,
and then you're just and then you're stuck. So it's a mental thing.
You can't blow like your entire load on the first 3 songs. Otherwise the rest of the set will. Yeah. You'll be too tired for that.
AF is an intense band too, because you're doing a lot of blast beat or like the old school D beat the whole time. So I'd imagine that there's a required physical thing also. AF, let's just talk about that really quick, because that is the band that you've been in for the past
10 years.
You've been in the band for 10 years now. When did you end up joining AF, and how many records have you played on at this point over the past 10 years?
When I first joined AF, it was a crazy time in my life. Leeway had broken up, so I had pretty much been done with I'm done with music. Screw this.
Right.
This whole deal sucks. Why bother? So then for a few years I became a restaurant manager. Okay. Because I'm fairly passionate about food and stuff. So.
Same, actually. I mean, living here, how can you not?
Yeah. So I had a decent job for a couple of years. Then I fell into a position where I was working at JFK Airport. Okay. I was managing 2 bar restaurants simultaneously.
That's a tough job to do when you're trying to tour and be in bands.
Yeah, it was kind of tough. And one day I had enough of that, and I quit that for good. And I hadn't been doing anything for a few months. And AJ, who I'd stayed friends with over the years from Leeway, right? He was working for a number of years at Astoria Soundworks. Yes, it's a rehearsal studio in Queens. It's a pretty big rehearsal studio. They have 20 rooms now. They needed somebody to take care of the drums, so I was hired there. And literally about a week later, Mike and Vinny were there rehearsing or doing something there, and they heard that I was working there. And their drummer Steve, who was Mike's younger brother,
right? He was in Inhuman and
he was in Inhuman.
With Mike Gallo, the Gallo brothers. Shout out to the Gallo brothers.
Yeah,
I known those guys from Long Island
Steve.
for a long time.
Yeah, he's playing tonight's show too.
Is that right?
Yeah, you're gonna see him too.
Oh, he's a fantastic. I love his drummer. I love his drumming on the AF records.
He had enough with with the band and wanted to leave, so they were looking for a drummer, and
there you were.
There I was. Yeah.
I got to shout out to Astoria Soundworks too. I had been there a few times, and when I walked in, I noticed that there was an overwhelming amount of New York hardcore bands that currently, present, have recorded there. So if you're as big of a fan of New York hardcore as I am, and a total dork about that stuff, go in there, because you might run into Pokey or Vinny Stigma in the hallway. Yeah, and the new record is fucking great. It's almost like a return to the Cause for Alarm sort of thrash era, or
kind of thrashy,
one voice.
Yeah, kind of crossover element thing.
Were you before we get into that real quick, and I want to talk about what you're doing now and what you're promoting, like, were you? I'm assuming you grew up listening to AF, so it must be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. My first exposure to AF, oddly enough, was I guess I was 15 or 16 or 17. I was jamming at the time with Craig Satari.
Shout out to Craig Satari. The guy actually
from Queens. We're all from Queens.
Yeah, he's a Queens guy. He taught me how to box once.
Yeah. We were just jamming metal covers and stuff like Metallica and Iron Maiden and stuff. And we would hang out at Danny Loker's house.
From Nuclear Assault.
From Nuclear Assault, yeah. And he was always the guy who would take younger kids under his wing and show them stuff and let expose them to music. And he was like, yo, listen to this is hardcore, this is Agnostic Front.
Wow, so Danny Liker played Agnostic Front for you.
Yes,
Do you remember?
Probably both me and Craig. Yeah.
Do you remember what?
And we both wound up being.
You ended up being. Yeah, Craig played on One Voice. Do you remember what record you heard?
Probably Victim in Pain or United Blood. Yeah.
Yeah. The early punk stuff. That is a crazy full circle moment.
Yeah, because that was 80. That must have been like 82, 83, 84, somewhere around there.
I'm spitballing here, but I actually just thought about something that I'd like to ask you, which is like, if anyone out there listening, there's a Netflix documentary that got pretty big, outside of just the hardcore scene. I mean, it's on Showtime. It's called Godfathers of Hardcore. It's about Vinny Stigma, the guitar player and founder of AF, and the lead singer Roger Murray. Roger Murray, sorry, let me just say that again. Yes. Have you noticed, earlier we were talking about how heavy music is like a fine wine, and, I commented that, like, you walk around New York and you see people wearing a certain outfit, and it's more of a fashion now, for better or for worse. Have you noticed a shift or weird people coming out to see you now that you've been on Showtime?
Not really. Maybe it's a little subtle, but
it's still hardcore. It hasn't.
Yeah, we still play hardcore shows. Bottom line, we're not.
Well, speaking of that, AF is playing an arena, opening up for the Misfits this Saturday in Philadelphia. By the time this is aired, that will have already happened already. But you guys play a lot of big places, touring Europe. Festivals
touring Europe. Like, we get to play big festivals and stuff.
Yeah.
But not so much in the States. It's only when we get to open up for bigger friends and bands and
It's an interesting time. I'm actually excited to mention this. I was at Slayer at Madison Square Garden. They were playing Victim in Pain on the house monitors in between bands, and it totally blew my mind. And about 2 or 3 weeks before that, Rancid played and shouted out the entire DMS crew, which was really
Rancid,
crazy.
They opened up for the Misfits there.
Well, I'm going to let you go. I know I've just taken 30 minutes of your time, but the last thing I will ask is, what do you have coming up? And because I know you have a new record, Get Loud, out on Nuclear Blast.
Nuclear Blast. It's out now.
Okay.
We're shooting some more videos. We're shooting a video called Divide and Conquer this week. So look for that. The video, I Remember, is out already.
That's a great video.
Go check that out. Yeah, it's a great song. We hope to be playing that one live a lot soon.
All right. Well, AF is going to be on tour at a town near you. They're pretty relentless on the road. And thank you so much, Pokey, for being on this podcast on Crash Bang Boom. And looking forward to seeing you play not only tonight, but at an arena in a few days. It's going to be a wild experience.
It's cool.
Awesome, man. Pick up the new Agnostic Front record on Nuclear Blast.
Get Loud.
Get Loud.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks to Chris and Pokey for wrapping on this round. I'm going to take a couple weeks off at the tail end of 2019 and regroup in the new year. So we'll catch you in 2020. Crash, bang, boom.